A review of a time travel episode. You know what that means. Doctor Who's is coming. You're not so Dr. Blendon.
Thought the battle was over, but I just getting stronger.
So the season finale, the Cutie remark. Season 5 was quite right, and this was definitely a spectacular way to end it. Ever since the Cutie map, every pony was waiting for Starlight Glimmer's eventual return. Ever since the animatic was revealed, we knew what the basic premise would be, and even if someone avoided it, there's a decent chance that the Friendship Games ending scene spoiled it anyway.
I'm so sorry I didn't get here sooner. I didn't get your messages until just now because I was caught in this time travel loop, and honestly, it was the strangest thing that's ever happened to me. Make that the second strangest.
But I think knowing the premise of an episode doesn't automatically ruin the experience. We only knew that this episode would involve time travel and Starlight Glimmer. We got another glance at this finale thanks to a promo, and it looked rather promising. Nightmare Moon's return and Celeste going to war seemed kinda epic, but since those scenes were out of context, they didn't actually reveal anything. But I cannot deny that I expected something different after watching this promo. I expected one alternate timeline, and I actually think it would have been better. That being said, I like the presented ones. I wasn't expecting to see any other old villains than Nightmare Moon, but it was really nice to see them all again. The Sombra timeline is probably my favorite one. It was a big surprise that we actually see ponies not only going to war, but fighting it as well. I really got a Fort Equestria vibe from it. You know, Equestria getting industrialized and every pony playing their part to support war efforts. We even got some propaganda posters, and look at Rainbow Dash. She has a freaking cyber wing. First time watching, I thought it was some sort of wing armor. Second time around, I noticed that it's only one of her wings. God, I already see a swarm of new cybernized OCs. Not only that, it's the only one that shows to a certain degree how the villain came to power. It is the best developed one, but I'm not sure if I like the armor of Sombra's army. However, the designs of Rainbow Dash, Pinkie Pie and Maud are pretty awesome. The Changing timeline is the second best developed. I really like the way they utilize Sakura in this two-parter, using her knowledge to fight a guerrilla war, Zebra style. Are we sure Josh Harbour hasn't read Fort Equestria? I'm getting the feeling that they wanted to produce a Fort Equestria episode but were unable to go through with it. Anyway, the mere fact that Sakura leads a resistance against Chrysalis and is apparently enough of a threat to the Changing Empire that the Queen goes after her in person is pretty awesome. It is also remarkable that Chrysalis gets a few lines, unlike Sombra, Terek and Discord, and it's the first time someone mentions her name. Sadly, we get no explanation how the Changelings took over. It is possible that Shining Armor and Kane's married like in the main timeline, but we will probably never know. But the first most interesting thing in this timeline is Fluttershy's behavior. In this timeline, the other Pegasi stopped bullying her. She seems to act as the leader of the band of ponies that finds Twilight and is much more aggressive.
All servants of Queen Chrysalis found in these woods must be destroyed.
Yep, Fluttershy is a ruthless warrior in this timeline. While her aggressive behavior is most likely the result of traumatic experiences, it is also possible that Fluttershy in this timeline has less self-esteem issues thanks to Starlight's intervention. The third major timeline we get to see is the Nightmare Moon one. It's a no-brainer how she took over. As there are no elements of harmony to defeat her, no one was able to stop her. And surprisingly, it's the most pleasant one. Most people like to point out that her eternal night would cause all plant life on Equestria to die, and with time, all ponies as well. But as Nightmare Moon put it, she banished Celestia years ago, and there's actually more plant life than before, so they probably found a way to substitute sunlight with magic, not to mention that tourism is apparently still a thing. Seriously, how many evil overlords let civilians visit their castle? Sure, eternal night sucks, but no pony seems to suffer, proving that Nightmare Moon is at least a lawful evil ruler and cares about the well-being of her subjects to a certain degree. I could make a mini-series about the implications of all these different timelines. Now that I think about it, why not? Fox Guide to the Equestrian Multiverse. Coming soon to this channel. It is also an interesting fact that Nightmare Moon mentions that she banished her sister years ago. As implied in this episode, Twilight always arrives the moment she left her timeline, so years passed between episode 1 and the Cutie remark. As only 1 year passed by the time of Princess Twilight Sparkle, this means at least another year passed since then, explaining why we had 2 winter episodes this season. Either that or Nightmare Moon wanted to sound more dramatic. I also dislike the fact that Twilight overcomes Nightmare Moon a little bit too easy, but I think this is a pacing issue. There wasn't time for more, and that's why multiple timelines are perhaps the biggest strength and greatest weakness of this two-parter. It's great to see all these villains again, and every version of Equestria is intriguing in its own way, but they don't really affect the overarching story, and since we spend more time jumping from one timeline to the next, we hardly learn anything about them. It would be far more interesting to have one timeline and explore the history and characters of that, preferably the Nightmare Moon one, as it is the one that makes the most sense. It is awesome the way it is, but it feels like a villain's version of Slice of Life, basically a fanservice episode for everyone who wanted to see their favorite villain again. again. Not helping are the other timelines they squeezed in. The Tyrek timeline actually makes Tyrek somewhat boring, as it proves he has no real ambition other than absorbing magic. After he accomplishes this, he only destroys everything. Seriously, it was somewhat okay in Twilight's Kingdom. I thought he only wanted to test out his new power, but apparently he does nothing else. You know, this wouldn't be so much of a problem if he weren't actually one of the more cunning villains. The only noteworthy thing about the Disco timeline is that Princess Luna is around, implying that Celestia found a way to reform her without the elements of harmony, which is actually quite intriguing, and the FlimFlam timeline is just stupid. Seriously, how can those two be any kind of threat? Not to mention that those two are more amoral sales ponies and not villains. I guess it is supposed to be a spoof of 90s Saves the Rainforest movies like Foam Gully and so on. The concept of time travel in general is a little bit confusing in this episode. It's about time implies that it's only possible to create a stable time loop, but since Starlight was capable to alter the spell and almost no series can be consistent with time travel rules, I won't complain about that. However, it's a little bit jarring that every change to the Rainbow Moon event alters history to such a degree, even though most things shouldn't be affected by the following butterfly effect. I see why this day is important to the main six and them stopping villains, but I don't see how this day can determine which villain will succeed. The only thing that should happen is that since the main six don't become friends, no one can defeat Nightmare Moon, and she stops every other villain from taking over. First villain wins. It's that simple. Okay, this is the point where anyone would insert a Doctor Who, Back to the Future, or maybe even a Star Trek reference, but as those have been done to death, I let Professor Zoom explain things.
Break the sound barrier and there's a sonic boom. You broke the time barrier, Flash. Time boom. Ripples of distortion radiated out through that point of impact, shifting everything just a tiny bit, but enough. Enough for events to happen slightly differently.
This explanation is as good as any other. I also noticed that all members of the main six apparently got the same cutie mark in every time room, even though they realized the talents under different circumstances. I think this is somewhat odd. I always thought that one's cutie mark is influenced by personal experience and environment, but apparently I was wrong. So it can be assumed that they still have the same destiny, but will fulfill it under different circumstances. It is probably still possible for the main six to become friends and use the elements of harmony in any given timeline, except probably the Tyrek and Wasteland timeline that is. You know, because everything is dead. In all other timelines the situation is indeed dire, but not exactly hopeless. The war against Sombra was far from over. The changelings still have to deal with resistance, and Nightmare Moon herself wanted the time stone to secure her position, basically admitting that her defeat is still a possibility. Anyway, I love the callbacks to previous episodes, not counting the return of every major villain for at least a scene. We get to see Moondancer at the beginning, and Twilight's presentation makes a reference to Crusaders of the Lost Mark, and apparently it's a pretty rare thing for multiple ponies to get their cutie marks simultaneously. The main focus of this episode are of course the events of the Cutie Mark Chronicles, and to a lesser degree, It's About Time. It's About Time is one of my favorite season 2 episodes, and apparently the writing staff also thinks very highly of this episode. This is the second time they used it as a setup for a season finale. Tyrek escaped during it, and apparently Starlight used an altered version of the same time travel spell introduced in that episode, thus making it pretty much one of the most important episodes of the series.
Is there some sort of epic pony war in the distant future or something?
The Cutie Mark Chronicles on the other form is perhaps one of the most interesting and beloved Season 1 episodes. It was the first time we actually learned something about the past of our heroines. It's a really cute and funny episode, and so I was really happy that they revisited it again. It was really intriguing to see the alternate outcomes of this episode's event. We see how our heroines fail to realize their talents and how depressed they are. Starlight also alters the events of this episode in some really clever ways. I almost lost at the moment when she helped Fluttershy by explaining that bullying is wrong, not to mention that she is the first adult to help in a bully situation and doesn't ignore it. This was perhaps one of the cleverest scenes in all of MLP. Not only does she prevent the sonic rainbow this way, she defeats Twilight with her own weapon, a friendship speech, and she can rub the benefits of her philosophy in Twilight's face while making the Princess of Friendship look bad. And Twilight challenging Rainbow Dash to a race was quite funny as well.
So, can I help you?
No, but maybe I can help you.
I need an adult.
I am an adult.
Starlight in general showed herself to be a quite competent villain. She wastes no time explaining things to Twilight and just casts her spell and prepared it in a manner that she can prevent Twilight from fixing the timeline. Everything she does is planned out, so she will always come out on top. She only needs to prevent the sonic rainbow, and their mere presence in the past is basically enough to ensure exactly that. Her magic skills are also quite impressive. I think she's the first unicorn that is actually able to fly using her magic. And before you say something, I know that Pumpkin Cake did it first, but it didn't make any sense back then. Well, of course, now the question remains, Is Starlight Glimmer overpowered for a mere unicorn? Is she more powerful than Twilight? I don't think so. If it comes to raw power, Twilight is probably stronger than her. And while she makes counterattacks, she's more on the defense. Maybe she has more skills than Twilight, but I'm pretty sure that she's not as powerful as a fully trained alicorn. But she is probably the most powerful unicorn in all of Equestria. Trixie is still the greatest though. So yeah, she's probably the next Star Sparrow, which makes her perhaps a little bit overpowered, but she wouldn't be much of a threat otherwise, so that's okay. The next controversial thing about her is most likely her motivation. It is actually quite surprising that she is only interested in revenge and has no further ambition to restore her village or something like that, but it makes somewhat sense. The plot wouldn't work otherwise, as Starlight would realize her mistakes as soon as she sees an altered timeline, and she would never achieve her goal this way either. We also learn her origins, which explains her behavior. I wasn't entirely sure what to make out of this. It seems a little bit underwhelming, but I came to the conclusion that I liked her backstory. It actually mirrors some friendship lessons we saw this season. In Bloom and Gloom, Apple Bloom feels that it seems she couldn't be friends anymore if they don't get their marks at the same time.
We've got responsibilities now, but maybe we'll see you later. Much later. Wait! Hold on! I can get my cutie mark back!
This is basically what happened to Starlight. Bloom and Gloom was also written by Josh Harber, so it's most likely no coincidence. But perhaps the most fitting analogy would be amending fences. Starlight Glimmer is like Moondancer. She felt betrayed by her only friend and chose isolation as a result.
That was only the first time I ever put myself out there, and then you didn't even bother to show up. Then you left town without saying goodbye, even though we were supposed to be friends. I was humiliated. I felt like I wasn't important. I never wanted to let myself be hurt like that again. Those three finally convinced me that I had value, that other ponies might like me and want to be my friend. And you didn't show up! Ah! And just like that, my friend was gone. His family recognized his magical talent and sent him off to Canterlot. I never saw him again. Well, why not? Because of his cutie mark. He got his and I didn't. He moved on and I didn't. I stayed here and never made another friend because I was too afraid another cutie mark would take them away too.
Yeah, Starlight had pretty similar feelings. Unlike Moondancer, however, Starlight had something to blame. Moondancer could only conclude that Twilight is a jerk, while Starlight believed that Sunblazer would have never betrayed her if it wasn't for that cutie mark. Of course, one could argue that making all ponies equal is somewhat extreme, but it actually mirrors Twilight's negative character traits. Just go and watch What About Discord again. Twilight couldn't understand how Discord developed such a good relationship with her friends. So she came up with something that was logical in her eyes. Discord puts them under a spell. Twilight tries to rationalize things she does not understand on multiple occasions, and I think Starlight did so as well. She couldn't understand why Sunblazer left her, so she rationalized that it must have been because of his cutie mark, and like Twilight tried to prove that Discord manipulated her friends, Starlight wanted to prove that the world would be a better place without cutie marks. The problem is Starlight had no one to talk some sense into her. Another thing What About Discord dealt with was jealousy, and I believe jealousy is the reason why Starlight is so obsessed with Twilight in this two-parter.
That's ridiculous. A cutie mark can't take your friends away.
Not every pony's lucky enough to get her cutie mark at the same time as her friend. You don't know what it's like to lose a friend because of a cutie mark. But once I stop the rain boom, you will!
We know that Starlight spied on the main six. We saw her in Amending Fences and What About Discord, the two episodes that mirror her motivations best. She soon realized how alike she and Twilight actually are, and that's why she wanted to ruin Twilight's life, because Twilight has everything she ever wanted. Twilight is an incredible magician and has plenty of friends, not to mention that she is connected to her friends due to her cutie marks, something that goes against all her beliefs. And again, like Twilight tends to do from time to time, especially when she has a freak out, she is so obsessed with that one thing that she does not consider the consequences of her actions.
I only saw what you showed me. Who knows what'll really happen?
I've seen it a dozen times. Things don't turn out well in Equestria without my friends.
Ugh, what's so special about your friends? How can a group of ponies that are so different be so important?
Yeah, and I agree with Starlight here. This episode somewhat tries to say that every friendship matters, but it makes it also pretty clear that it's all about the main six. If those six don't come together, the world is doomed. I can see why Starlight would refuse to believe this, and I'm not sure if this is the best lesson. All friendships are important, but some are more special than others. And then there is her redemption. Let's be honest, it was the only possible outcome for her. She's no monster that can be simply turned into stone or even killed off without a second thought. I just don't think that this show would do something like this. Okay, she could have stayed a villain and returned in season 6 or 7, but it would get old. So yeah, redemption was the only option. And while it was somewhat rushed and easily handled with a friendship speech after it failed in the Cutie map, seeing the equestrian wasteland with her own eyes probably shocked her enough to at least consider Twilight's words. At least it was better handled than some other redemptions.
But all I've ever done since being here is drive everyone apart. I don't know the first thing about friendship.
I bet they can teach you.
Yeah, overall her redemption was way better handled than Sunset's, and she was a far more competent villain, and her plan made at least some sense. Problem is, Starlight came second after Rainbow Rocks already aired. Rainbow Rocks fixed many problems for Sunset and made her into a popular character. They were both designed as evil counterparts to Twilight, and both are now redeemed and function as Twilight students. We didn't need Starlight Glimmer. If Sunset wouldn't exist, I would think that Starlight is an awesome character and I would like her so much more. Since Equestria Girls is a thing, however, she comes off as the Sunset knockoff that steals her potential role in the show, basically ruining any chance that they will integrate her anytime soon. But to be fair, I really disliked Sunset before Rainbow Rocks was released, so I will not judge Starlight before we see more of her in season 6, as she is apparently now a part of the main cast, so I guess it's now main 7. Anyway, did you notice that the scenes with her hanging out with the main 6 somewhat mirrors their activities in the opening? That's pretty clever, and her visiting the village had a nice touch to it, and the last group shot was quite awesome as well. So let's wrap things up. This was a great two-parter, and I wouldn't be surprised if this episode was penned as a possible grande finale for the whole series. It actually had final episode written all over it, but so had Twilight's Kingdom and Magical Mystery Cure to a certain degree. However, if this were to be the final episode, it would have been a good end to the series, but luckily it isn't. It was a cleverly written episode with plenty of awesome moments, but I do think that they tried to fit a little bit too much into this two-parter and caused some pacing issues this way. But pacing is a problem in pretty much every MLP two-parter so far, and the time travel mechanics were a little bit questionable, but this is hardly a problem. I loved all time loops, but they felt a little bit like fan pandering. This episode is designed as fanfic view, and while I don't really read fanfics, I'm somewhat curious what the fandom will make out of them. I also hope that those timelines will be revisited in the comics someday. So what is there left to say? It's an epic conclusion for an awesome season. Maybe it's not the best two-parter, but still one of the better ones. And it probably pushed Sombra into a more positive, negative light. I could nitpick more things, but it wouldn't change the fact that I liked the Cutie remark. And now that I think about it, no one got a new Cutie mark in any timeline, so the title is hardly fitting. But what about you? Did you like this episode? Anything that bothered you? What was your favorite timeline and why? Let me know in the comments. I am Tricky Fox. Thanks for watching, and if you don't mind, like, share, subscribe or check out my other videos.